Hey, what's up guys? It's Foster, and as you can tell, we're at Paragon Performance today. There's a bunch of cool C8 Corvettes sitting around the shop, but we're actually here to use their dyno with our 22 WRX, and that's because we're gonna be doing an intake shootout video. So we've got the Perrin intake on the car at the moment. We've also got the AEM one and the ETS intake. We're gonna compare them all head to head, see how they perform on the stock tune, and then Graham from Boosted Performance is gonna tune them, and we're gonna find out how much power they make. And at the end, we'll go over the pros and the cons of each intake so you can find out which one's right for you. So not a lot has changed with our WRX since you've seen it last, but I'll quickly go over some of the things that it's got. We've got the new Perrin Radiator Shroud here, just a nice dress-up bit, and then we've got the optional Airbox for our Perrin intake. I would recommend getting the Airbox because that's going to keep heat away from your intake and help your intake perform a little bit better. But in terms of mods, we've got the Cobb top mount intercooler, we've got a stock J-pipe, a catback exhaust. So more or less the results that you see in today's video are going to be what you can achieve with a stock WRX. So let's go over the basics of an intake. What's the benefit of an intake on a turbocharged car?
Okay, so the benefit is with turbocharged cars, they have to pull in a high volume of air to compress it and shove it in the engine. So anything that you can do to restrict or to lessen the restriction of air trying to come into a turbo, including to the point of sometimes just putting a filter or a turbo guard on the big turbos like you see on, the drag cars do, anything you can do to let air come into the turbo easier is going to translate to the volume of air it can put in the engine. So that's the big benefit.
So in terms of bang for your buck mods, I'd say getting an intake early on would be beneficial.
Absolutely. We've told people from the beginning, the single best mod you can do for these cars is an intake. It's worth, we saw just with the intake and no tuning, we saw 20 to 25 horsepower or more. We typically see 30 without any tuning changes in our testing that we've done, up to 40 with some tuning changes, kind of taking advantage of the intake.
That's why we're doing this testing today. And between the intakes on the market, do they seem to be pretty different? Do you think this would be a good test to run?
I think it's a good test to run. From what we're seeing so far, Perrin specifically designed their intake to be similar to a stock size housing, which is important because it allows the airflow to be read similar to stock. So you get the advantages of the air coming in a lot easier, but it gets measured and metered the same way so it doesn't affect the fueling. That's important with a stock tune because at a certain point in the RPMs, the stock tune stops controlling the fueling and it just kind of goes off of the mapping.
I'm assuming all the intakes will work better with a tune, right? And you're gonna get the most performance out of an intake if it's properly calibrated.
Absolutely. We saw today that the Perrin worked well with the stock tune. I think based on what I've seen with the AEM data, it's gonna be pretty similar. It's sized pretty similar to stock. I think they kind of had the same approach. ETS has the sleeve. The sleeve does pull the scaling and kind of down closer to stock, but from my testing with the sleeve in, it's still probably gonna run the car a little bit leaner than you'd like to have, in my opinion. So I still think the ETS definitely needs a tune. I think the AEM and the Perrin, you get away without it.
Cool, so hopefully we get some results that show you guys which intake is right for you, whether you're planning on getting a tune or if you want something that can just bolt onto your car with a stock tune. And yeah, we'll see what happens.
Let's find out. So we're testing the Perrin intake on here now, and we've flashed this back to a stock tune. So really we're just testing the intake. It's a stock J-pipe on here and then a catback system. We have pump 93 octane in there, and we did 3 runs. And honestly, it looks pretty good for being an intake that's designed to work with the stock tune. I would agree that for the most part, it works pretty well. We did log AFR. I logged everything we did, and I also logged AFR on the dyno. And we can see the stock tune compared to this tune. There is a spot where it goes a little bit rich, around 4,000 RPMs, richer than the stock tune does and calls for. Then there's a spot a little after 5,000 where it's actually a little bit leaner than the stock tune is calling for. By that point, the car switched into open loop fueling, meaning it just kind of hits what it hits. That's part of what makes you know, having a appropriate sized intake so important. If we don't have that, it can get very lean or very rich on AFR. I can definitely see that with some tuning with this intake, it's going to be even better. We can put the fueling right on target and it should perform really well. So for those of you at home who are, you know, you're not ready to put an access port on the car, you're worried about the warranty, or just not quite ready to go there yet, but you want to, you know, make a modification to the car that does pick up some horsepower and isn't going to run it dangerous, I think the Perrin intake is an okay mod for you, you know, for a daily driver. If you really like to run your car hard, if you like to take your car to the track, in general, with any Subaru, including these, we can't recommend doing mods without following it up with some tuning to make sure everything's perfect. Well, the graph speaks for itself. Huge gains, you know, with tuning it with the intake on it. The factory tune runs very low boost pressure on these cars. It's a very conservative in that sense. Did a little bit more fine tuning, kind of wanted to, you know, while we're on the dyno, establish a higher base point, kind of see what we can do with this intake, look for restrictions as we're comparing the other ones that we're going to compare today. And we hit 327 with 403 torque, and then made one more update, ended up doing 3 runs back to back on that last map. We hit 335, 335, and 337. So very solid. Typically with an intake only car, I'm stuck at around 330, you know, give or take. I think the intercooler is helping a little bit, not trying to lean on it too much. Down low, certainly the 405 torque and even 408 torque, it's spiking the boost a little bit more than I want. I could spend some more time cleaning that up, but I'm not too worried about it. Pretty much after the initial onset of boost right now, we have a good baseline for today for our intake testing. We ran the car with the AEM intake. We put it back on the stage 0 map, which is a stock map that I can still data log, and gave it a pull to see what it would look like. We did pick up some pretty good power. We hit 299, almost 200 horsepower and 296 torque. So compared to the Perrin intake on here, it did outperform it in many areas. The problem is that it runs pretty lean. It does run about as lean as the Perrin does at 5,000, but it keeps running lean all the way out to redline. About 12 AFR is what I see and what I logged, and it picked up some knock when that happened. That's really pretty lean for a pump gas AFR, even with the lower boost. So it worked to make some pretty good power, but it's not exactly very safe in my opinion. So I definitely wouldn't recommend using the AEM intake without a tuning solution behind it. I know they've tested it and they say it's fine, but a lot of manufacturers will say that. The Perrin intake on here compared, you know, to the AEM does genuinely seem to work better. I didn't see any knock on those runs. The boost is closer to the stock targets and the fueling is safer overall. All right, so we're testing the AEM intake on here now, and we're using the same tune that we left off with the Perrin intake. Again, want to make sure we don't change any variables. Boost, fuel, timing, cam timing, everything is identical. The only thing I changed in the tune was the MAF scaling, the intake scaling, so it wouldn't have to be leaning on the fuel correction very much. But really there's not much of a change there between the two intakes. They're both sized pretty similar to stock. So we're really just kind of seeing how the intakes perform against each other. And what we're seeing is that AEM actually did edge out the Perrin. The Perrin would kind of hit a boost spike and then fall off a little bit. And the AEM kind of just comes up and holds boost flatter. So it's got some decent gain in the mid-range there and kind of a smoother torque curve down low. And then all throughout the power band, it just seems to be a little bit better. 8 to 10 horsepower difference is kind of what we're seeing. So we ran the car with the ETS intake on here. Again, just only thing changing in the tuning is scaling for the ETS intake. You guys didn't put the MAF sleeve in, so that makes the intake basically very large and quite a big difference in scaling. We can't run it like that stock. It'll run very lean. And even with the MAF sleeve installed, I still really don't like how lean these cars end up. It's definitely better if you're gonna run it around anyway, is to put the MAF sleeve in, but still with ETS intake, I definitely recommend tuning, so we didn't even try to run it without. But the power looks really good. We hit 342 horsepower and 396 torque. The AEM still seems to outperform through the mid-range and is a fair amount smoother. The ETS was a little bit better in the mid-range than the Perrin, and then pretty much about the same horsepower all the way through as the AEM once it gets past about the 5,000 RPM mark. The future benefit of the ETS intake is that since it is a larger MAF housing, when we get to the point of doing turbo upgrades on these cars, the Perrin and the AEM intake might reach a point where we can't read the airflow. We run out of basically MAF scaling that we can use for bigger horsepower or larger turbos. The ETS intake is kind of future-proofed for doing quite a bit more horsepower, so that's a nice thing. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is we're trying to keep this test as controlled as we can. We are doing it all day to day. We didn't change the tune. This is just a sample size of one car though. Other cars might be a little bit different, so as I have more time to have more of these cars on the dyno with different intakes on them, I'll have a better picture down the road. But for today, they all end up fairly similar for the most part, with AEM being the winner for today.
All right, so after our testing, I think in terms of the stock tune, the Perrin intake actually seemed like the winner today.
Yeah, it works great with the stock tune. If you don't plan on modding your car, or maybe you just want to run the Cobb maps, but you want a little bit more power, the Perrin intake definitely works the best for that. ETS is a no-go in my opinion because of the way it's scaled. AEM's a little bit off, a little bit uncomfortable for me with the fueling. Perrin really works.
Yeah, so if you're just looking for a bolt-on intake and you don't want to mess with any tuning, I think the Perrin is the right choice for the F824. Stock tune aside, let's talk a little bit about which intake was the best with custom tuning and which one saw the biggest power gains. I think I was pretty surprised to see that the AEM was kind of the clear winner.
Yeah, the AEM really delivered, and we got a sample of a run from each one, but we did 3 runs on each intake just to verify we didn't have a silly run. And every time the AEM would come up and it would hold quite a bit more power and boost, even though I wasn't changing anything in the tune, versus the Perrin that seemed like it was getting a little bit choked there again, I think because of the reusing the inlet piece there, and then the ETS was kind of somewhere in the middle. But yeah, I was surprised to see how well the AEM worked.
If you're going for big horsepower or something like that, then the ETS will start to be an advantage due to its MAF housing size, right?
Yep, exactly. It's kind of future-proofed for quite a bit more horsepower. We might run out, it might be maybe somewhere, say around 400 on the Perrin and the AEM before they hit the end of the MAF scaling. whereas the ETS in theory could be good for 500. So if people are, you know, wanting to get a little wild on these cars, the ETS intake is going to do that. And it was the same thing for the, you know, the older cars too. They had some more range on it, you know, so to speak, for the future.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, hopefully you guys found this video guide helpful if you're in the market for an intake. Obviously, it's a great mod to do if you're looking to pick up some power. And hey, thanks for doing all the testing with us today,
Certainly,
Graham.
yeah, we got some new high scores here on Stage 1 Plus. That's kind of cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.